My journey into the pet industry started in biotechnology. And the reason I went into biotechnology is because I am a biochemist. What I learned in biotechnology is that I am a very bad biochemist who loved biotechnology and needed to educate up in order to be able to stay in biotechnology. I dumped the lab coat, I got an MBA, and I realized that what I really loved about biotechnology was the innovation and the impact that I was able to make in doing the work. And it was work that I loved to do. I was inspired to do the work. I had purpose, I had meaning, but even more than that, I had a positive identity. And the identity was shared with colleagues, was shared, it was mutual, and it was just joyous. I just was at the top of my game while I was working in biotechnology until I found out that I had to lay off a good portion of my work staff. My colleagues were riffed, and I was ultimately laid off. I did not want to leave that job. That was a sense of purpose, that it wasn't just finding another job, it was a true identity, and I was devastated to have lost that. So in typical biochemist fashion, because even though I was bad at it, I still had a really overactive left brain, I tried to wrap my left brain around what had just happened and what I needed to do to get out of that funk. And what I discovered was that I needed to really flex my underdeveloped and underused right brain and find creativity and find a sense of clarity as to why this was having such a big impact. I was fortunate in that when I was in biotechnology, I traveled all the time. I had a boatload of frequent flyer miles that had accrued, and I took all the frequent flyer miles and I went to a country as far, far away as I could get. A vacation that my husband still refers to as our third world vacation. And I spent time there, and I just thought about, what do I need to do to get back this sense of purpose and to find out how to make this not happen to me again. So my left brain came back and said, if you could figure out how not to get laid off again and to do work that you found impactful, what would you do? Of course, you would start a company in the pet industry. So here I am with all of you who are all very passionate and innovative and caring and have this identity. It's perfect. Then I would get to live wherever I wanted to live, which today may not seem so perfect, but I get to live in Boulder. And I could hire people who I would never lay off. So I started that process, and I quickly realized that we had work that needed to be done that had ebbs and flows. And so it was difficult to hire the right amount of people for that work. And so what I did is I went a very traditional path. I went to a temp agency and I hired temporary workers. These were folks that were often in between jobs, and so we spent a lot of time retraining workers and doing things that I was wholly unprepared to do, such as explaining why it's never a good idea to smoke weed outside your boss's office while you're on break. And so I realized at that point that I needed to change my approach to finding people, and what The Economist had always told me in business school was accurate, that if you have an unemployment rate of less than 4%, everybody who really wants to work is working. And so we know that going a traditional path lends itself to difficulties. I needed to find a non-traditional path. I needed to figure out if there was a way that I could find a workforce that met all of my goals and was a workforce that really wanted to work. And what I found was in intellectually and developmentally disabled adults that they not only want to work, but they go through extensive job training and job coaching. And they're more than just an employee. They have traits that actually lend themselves to productivity in the workforce, exactly what we're looking for, especially when we have roles that have those ups and downs and can be pretty repetitive in nature. The other thing that I learned is that globally, there are over 200 million intellectually disabled adults, and in the US, there are 6.5 million. Of the 6.5 million, only 28% of working age adults have the opportunity to work, and only 17% work in a competitive environment. So I went back to the difficulty I had when I wanted to work and they didn't want me to work, and it took away that identity. And I thought about how could we make an impact, make a difference in this workforce. So in 2005, InClover and Core Labor Source formed a public-private partnership, and we have hired since that time over 40 intellectually disabled adults at our facility. They have over 10,000 hours of work. We measure KPIs regularly. As a matter of fact, they're usually shouted through the hallway every day. And it has created a generous and gracious workplace environment that spreads into the DNA of the company. And that's really what is key to the impact that we've made. In closing, I had considered telling you the impact that this has all had on me, but I feel like the real difference is really in the people that are impacted. And so I've invited somebody here today who is part of the workforce at InClover and has really made a difference in our workplace KPIs and the workforce environment. So I want to introduce you to Randy and give Randy an opportunity to tell you what's made a difference. This is Randy right here.
I'm right here, Rebecca.
Hi, Randy. Good to see you.
Hi, I'm Randy, and I've worked at InClover since 2015. I enjoy doing this job because I like progress. We make, and I like the money too. I go to a lot of rock concerts, and I'm glad that I have a job to help pay for the concerts. I'm grateful to have this job. I'd like to thank Rebecca and all the staff at InClover for their support. You're welcome.
Thank you, Randy, so much for sharing that. And thank you, Rebecca, for sharing all of the incredible impact and action you're able to do at InClover. Okay, so next up, we have Robert Armstrong with WellPet. Let me pull up your slides for you 1 second. Here's your clicker. Microphone. Hold on 1 second.
All right, so my name's Robert, and I work at WellPet. And before I start, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my family. We live in southern New Hampshire, and this is my wife, Rachel, and our two beautiful children, William, who's 2.5, and Charlotte, who's 11 months. And our fur family member, Mo. She's a 5-year-old rescue lab hound mix. So that's my family, and the family on the right is the family that WellPet serves. So our family of brands, which was founded in 1926, makes food and treats for all of these lovely animals, pets. Wellness, Sojos are our foods, and then Old Mother Hubbard and Whimsies are our treats. And now that we're after lunch, I'm going to ask everybody else to stand for a little exercise. So, I want you to think about the last 7 days. And if you have done any of these things, please sit down. So, have you drank from a plastic water bottle? Single use, yes. How about a Keurig coffee? How about a plastic straw? All right, there's still a lot standing. Hopefully this next one gets you all. And how about using a tube of toothpaste? So for the people standing, either you... What's that? Yep. Toothpaste bites, all right. Well, I wish I had a prize for you both. So the reality is that plastics, and especially single-use plastics that are hard to recycle, are pervasive in our lives, daily lives. And it's really something that we can't escape. So as manufacturers, WellPet included, we've begun to think about what single-use plastics do we include with our products that maybe we can reduce. So just to give some insight or some scale to what this issue looks like, in 1960, when the EPA started tracking plastic, 390,000 tons of plastic was produced and then wasted, landfilled. And that's equivalent to one Empire State Building, the weight of one Empire State Building. Unfortunately, since that time, we've become addicted. So in 2015, the last data point from this study, 67 times that was landfilled. So 67 Empire State Buildings went straight into the ground after taking away the stuff that's been recycled. And the chilling thing is that this line isn't changing its slope. So when we extrapolate it out to 2040, it looks like when my kids turn 21, it'll be 100 Empire State Buildings. So WellPet, this is a, as Greta would say, it's something that we all need to be thinking about, and what can we do differently? So as manufacturers, there's the 3 R's. We were all, at least my generation, was taught through Magic School Bus: reduce, reuse, and recycle. And as I was preparing for this talk, I learned that there were 2 others, starting with refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle, and then repurpose. But as a manufacturer, we're going to focus on the big 3 and what we can do. So recycling. Recycling is carbon and capital intensive. And it's also confusing. So a recent GMA survey showed that 96% of adults rate recycling as more complex than doing your taxes. The stock market, building IKEA furniture, and understanding the opposite sex. So there's clearly a problem. That confusion has led to what's called aspirational recycling. 40% of people report doing it. And that's when we recycle something that we hope is recyclable. The problem with that, and it's even worse for millennials do it 49% of the time, is that by putting things in that aren't clearly recyclable, we're ruining these municipal recycling streams, decreasing their value, and making recycling a very tough business to be in. So at WellPet, our bags are not currently recyclable, but what we have done is we've worked with TerraCycle to find a way to upcycle. And TerraCycle works by, after the consumer uses their bag of food, they'll take it to a TerraCycle drop-off. TerraCycle will take those resins, grind it down, and then find a use for it, whether it's park benches, playground equipment, or tote bags. Next is reduce. So as manufacturers, we don't want to reduce our overall revenue. So there's only so much that we can do when it comes to reducing and sticking with a solid business strategy. The same is true with the packaging itself. We can't give a consumer half the bag and think that it'll hold the same amount of food. So we've taken some small steps in our manufacturing operations, but then also at our home office, such as we don't have disposable cups or glasses anymore, an easy one. We have a seltzer machine where we've kept 36,000 cans from recycling or landfill. We're clearly seltzer lovers. And we have adopted the dreaded paper straw. So that leaves reuse. Reuse used to be very common in this country, and it's the milkman model. So 60 years ago, most people got their milk through that model. Now, the problem is that there's no infrastructure today for that, and it takes some consumer buy-in. But going back to that same Grocery Manufacturers Association study, 75% of consumers are now very or extremely concerned about the environment. And those 75% are also willing to have a behavior change. And that's where Loop comes in. So Loop, which was founded by TerraCycle, is a way to create the infrastructure for a reusable packaging system. So right now, it's fairly simple. And it launched in May this year in 3 key markets, London, Paris, and then the Northeast. And consumers can go on, log into the site, and buy their shampoo, their pretzels, soon their dog treats, their laundry detergent. And Loop will ship those products to you in a reusable container. Not just a reusable container for the product, but then also the container for your entire order. You'll enjoy your products, and then when you're done, you ship the containers back to Loop to create this circular economy. Loop will then clean the containers and send them back to the manufacturers to fill again. And so their idea is, how do they reduce, Loop's mission is ultimately to reduce the idea of waste, so make it obsolete. So instead of consumers buying a package that they then throw away, consumers borrow a package for the time that they're using it. So these are some of the examples of the products and brands that are on the platform, and then the tote itself. I have to say, the ice cream is delicious. Sorry. And so the whole concept has been a way, how can you do a single shopping cart to get many of your household needs? And what you'll notice is a commonality in the packaging. So unlike your grocery store where there's a wide variety of packaging, most of it plastic, here, because everything has to be reused, it has to be stronger material. So stainless steel and glass are the primary packages on the store. The exciting thing is that these are all the brands that are either on the store today or have committed to being there soon. Old Mother Hubbard is one of them, and we're working quickly to be there. And what you see 4 of the major multinational consumer CPG companies represented up here. Unilever, P&G, Nestle, and PepsiCo all have products on the store today. So this is our product. It's not ready for prime time yet, but eventually, come early next year, you'll be able to order one of these if you live in the Northeast and get it filled with pet treats before you, for your dog to show them the love that you have for them. So the first question that I get asked whenever I introduce this concept to somebody in the company or elsewhere is like, how can it make sense to ship these heavy containers across the country back and forth, and what does it actually do for the life cycle of the product? So Loop has done a life cycle assessment, and this is kind of an eye chart, but the key here is that it's comparing traditional e-commerce here, 10 orders, to 10 orders on Loop, standalone. And so what you see is that, yes, while transportation is much higher on Loop, the actual single-use cardboard is, this is single-use cardboard, is completely gone. Single-use bubble wrap is completely gone. And the product itself, while initially intends to create, the package itself, while initially intends to create, compared to using 10 bottles, it's much better. So this savings, which is about 2 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent, would be essentially what Ben & Jerry's a single pint is. So with that, I want to leave the challenge to the group is when you're considering your packaging efforts, consider how you could do something reusable. Whether it's loop or another method, there are other ways to introduce reusability into your process flow. And I want to leave you with this sobering fact. Since I started talking 9-ish minutes ago, 9 million bottles of water have been purchased around the world, single use. So, along with that, consider that the next time that you take a bottle of water for free. So thank you.
Okay. Oh, great. So while I've got free time here, how'd you enjoy the lunch? So, I believe, Caitlin, was it Petco that sponsored the lunch? Who sponsored the lunch? Okay, Petco sponsored all of the food, but the bison that you enjoyed, how many people had their first taste of bison today? All right, what'd you think? It was really good. All right. Want to thank Bob Deneen and I don't know where Ace is, Ace Ward, Rocky Mountain Natural Meats, located here in Colorado. They donated the bison for the lunch, so be sure and thank them. So I'm Dave Carter. I'm the director of the National Bison Association, and want to spend 9 minutes talking about what I consider to be the greatest story of market-based species restoration in the history of North America. So, but Caitlin said, first of all, I had to tell you who I am. So just native Coloradan, born in Longmont. I grew up in the mountains about 30 miles northwest of here. Been in agriculture 40 plus years. For the last 18 years, I've been executive director of the National Bison Association. My wife and I are partners with 2 other ranchers on a herd of 220 mother cows that are on a 7,800 acre ranch owned by the Savory Institute east of Denver. I was on the National Organic Standards Board for 5 years and was chair of the board when the organic standards came into place. And because I'm a part-time executive director, I also do some consulting, and myself and 2 other folks founded Pet Promise Pet Food in 2003, which was really the first brand that started emphasizing the traceability of its ingredients. So, now, let's get to the star of the show, which is the bison. So if we're going to talk about the history of species restoration, we have to go back about 200,000 years, because that's when the ancestors of today's bison first came over from Asia. And they were big animals. I mean, they were really big animals. The Ice Age was underway, and big animals dominated. And as the Ice Age intensified, they became even bigger. Bison latrifons had a horn span of about 7 feet. But then the Ice Age began to ebb, the climate began to change, and predators, including humans, learned to hunt in packs. So being a big lumbering animal wasn't an advantage anymore. So your choice as a species was you either downsized and became more nimble, or you went extinct. The woolly mammoth went extinct. Bison began to downsize. And that process happened in concert with the evolution of the ecosystem of North America, and primarily the grassland ecosystem, which covers nearly 40% of the North American continent, is historically a grassland ecosystem. And it evolved in concert with the bison. And so the species of grasses that began to develop out there all evolved under that grazing action of bison. The wallowing created the depressions in the land that captured the water that would recharge the soil. In fact, many of the lakes and what they call the prairie potholes across the northern plains began as buffalo wallows. The hoof action stirred the soil and planted the seeds. The manure recharged the soil, gave the nutrients back to the soil. So this North American grassland is what I call America's rainforest. You think about how important the rainforest is in South America and on the attention, but in North America, this is what's capturing carbon. You go out 40 miles east of here and you'll see grasses this high or this high or this high, but underneath is this incredibly deep, complex root system. And those blades of grass take the energy and the carbon out of the air and put it back down into the soil. And they build the soil. But they can't do it by themselves. If left untended, they would grow up and choke themselves off and turn the grasslands into a desert. They've got to have a gardener. And this is the gardener that Mother Nature provided. Now, sure, the deer and the antelope were playing out there, but the buffalo were roaming. They were the keystone species that created this and helped build that healthy soil. And they did one other thing when they ate that grass, was they took the cellulose, which is undigestible by us, and turned it into a really nutritionally dense protein. And that's why, if you think about it, bison is nature's original plant-based protein. So when we talk about regenerative agriculture, you know, these are the classic definitions. It's practices that increase biodiversity. They capture the carbon and put it back down into the soil, reversing the trends. And grazing animals are a key component. Albert Howard, who was the father of organic agriculture, said, "Never does nature separate the animal and vegetable worlds. This is a mistake that they cannot endure." Michael Pollan said if he could make one change in agriculture, he'd put animals back on the farm because they're that important. Well, we almost screwed it up. Because before the first European settlers came, there were as many as 40 million bison in North America. And then through a combination of factors, the railroads going through, the buffalo hunters hunting them, the Industrial Revolution, the hides make great belts for those factories, so they slaughtered a lot of them. A strategy to deny the Native Americans their food supply, so they go on the reservations, and probably the diseases that were brought over from European cattle killed as many as anything else. But for those combination of factors, by 1885, we estimate that there were about 700 animals left alive in North America, in the world. They had 3 hooves over the brink of extinction. And fortunately, there was a handful of ranchers, primarily at the urging of their wives, that went out and gathered up the remnants of the herd and began to create what we call the 5 foundation herds where almost all bison come from. And there were a few other players. The Bronx Zoo played a role, and so did Teddy Roosevelt. But it was these ranchers in the West that began to restore the animals. Well, fortunately, well, I got this one out of slide, but I'll tell you that. Today, we are up to about 200,000 bison here in the United States. In North America, there are almost 400,000 bison. We're the #1 processing and marketing state. South Dakota is the biggest state with a number of herds. But our goal is to bring back 1 million bison to North America. We call it Bison 1 Million. Now, the ranchers are playing a big role. We have a relationship with the Intertribal Buffalo Council. We're trying to get more bison back on tribal lands. We're working with the conservation community. But I'll tell you, there's a critical 4th partner in bringing back more bison, and that's the customers. The more you eat bison, the more we're going to bring them back. And so that's why we want to emphasize that companion animals are vital partners for us in helping to bring back those animals. Using all of the animal, just as the Native Americans stressed. Bison can create a point of difference in pet food. I've talked to several folks here today that are already talking about it. It's a nutritious ingredient, and we have marketers that are anxious to work with individual companies to establish that supply chain to give you something different to work with. Now, I have to tell you, we're also fighting a defensive battle right now. As bison has gotten more popular as a pet food ingredient, some folks have discovered that they can bring in water buffalo and just call it buffalo on the package. And we're fighting those folks tooth, hammer and tongs. So we've launched on our website a Don't Be Buffaloed webpage that we're encouraging people to go to, because not only does it point out the companies that are doing the wrong thing, we're trying to highlight the companies that are doing the right thing. In fact, we have them up on top. And if you're doing anything with bison and you're not there, let me know. We're working with AFCO to do a new ingredient definition, so we're hoping to get this resolved. And Senator Bennett from Colorado and Senator Hoeven from North Dakota have introduced a truth in buffalo labeling bill, because this is also happening in the human food market. So we not only want to fight a rear defensive battle, but we want to work with you to promote what we're calling Partners in Bison Restoration. And this is a new program that we're rolling out that we want to work with companies on, that you could put this on your package. And what it is, it talks about Partners in Bison Restoration and ethical stewardship of our herds. We're working with our marketers and processors. We have a code of ethics in the National Bison Association that our members agree to adhere to. And our processors, as they have those supply agreements with their ranchers, are putting in those affidavits that they adhere to our code of ethics. And it's about humane animal husbandry. It's about fair business practices. So anyway, we want to partner with companies to use Partners in Bison Restoration. Go down to that website. That takes you to a site that helps tell the story of what this animal is doing to regenerate a healthy ecosystem, healthy families, healthy communities. So, we just ask you to be our partner in bison restoration. Thank you.
Great, thank you, everybody. That was amazing. So as far as I figure it, we heard from Rebecca talking about people. We heard from Robert talking about plastics, and Dave just told us about prairies. You guys are all lying around the P's that are going to drive sustainability in our industry. No, really, I think that one question I have for you guys, and maybe are we going to get a panel up here? Awesome. While we're getting that ready, thanks. Perfect. I got something for the audience to consider, and I'm going to put it to our panel here in a moment. You know, to drive change that's durable and impactful, it doesn't come easily. It's always met with a lot of obstacles along the way, and those obstacles can be discouraging. And when you're trying to bring a population into the workforce that is disadvantaged, or you're trying to get single use and carbon impact to go down, or you're trying to restore an ancient herd, there are huge obstacles, aren't there? So you think about your work and what you do, we're all overcoming obstacles every day. And I'm curious for you folks up here, I'm going to put you on the spot, if you wouldn't just mind sharing one thought you've had in your years of business where you felt like there was an obstacle or a barrier, and how'd you overcome that? How'd you get out of that space of despair and frustration to the place of opportunity that you've found? Rebecca, you want to go first?
No, but I will. For me, it was the trying to figure out how to hire the right number of people to start. So I had been in big business before, and if I had an IT problem, I just walked down the hall and I found Don and he fixed it. And I never knew how he fixed it, but it just happened. And so the first couple of times when I was in a situation where our IT system was down and nobody knew what to do and things just kept building from that, it just felt like, why don't I just go back to the corporate world and just hit the easy button? And then I remembered they laid me off.
So I guess for me, and I took my name badge off, but it has the word curiosity on it. And so whenever I've come across a challenge before and fairly small compared to being laid off. But when we're looking at a new process for how to create a new product for the pet industry, and nobody's doing it, and we're trying to figure out what machine will help us, and just being curious and thinking outside, finding things that are non-obvious is the key. And those non-obvious things can be simple serendipity, like both Rob and the founder of PSC talked about this morning, or it could be asking for help from somebody who you wouldn't expect to. So, for packaging, we've been running into the wall of how do we make our packaging more sustainable, and so we took a different path, and instead of going recycling, well, let's consider reuse.
Couple things come to mind. First of all, for me personally, I was working for a general farm organization in the 1980s, which was a time that everybody still refers to as the farm crisis. It was a really, really, really ugly time in agriculture. We were involved in setting up a suicide hotline out in northeastern Colorado. And what I found coming out of that was agriculture beginning to diverge into two paths. There was the traditional commodity agriculture. You're going to produce a number 2 yellow corn, and so to do that, you had to have the most land and the biggest tractor, lowest cost of production. And then there were other folks that were saying, no, I'm not a commodity producer. I'm a farmer, or I'm a rancher. I produce food, and I want to have a connection with my customer. And that's where my passion really began. I started working with folks like Mel Coleman Sr., who started Coleman Natural Beef, and Farmer John Ellis here in Boulder County that locals know. And, talk about folks that had that commitment. Now, fast forward to the bison business. Gosh, any number of challenges. We are such a small business, and we're happy about that. We never want to be a mainstream commodity. We are happy being a niche. But just to give you a little chance, of scale, we processed about 60,000 animals under federal inspection all of last year. And that's what our friends in the beef business do before noon on an average day. So, when you're small, you don't have the resources or the thing. In 2003, 2004, we had a grant to do a pilot project, and I went to Nashville, Tennessee, to get restaurants to put bison on the menu for Father's Day, and these chefs would say, great, that sounds great, I'm glad to do it. How do I do it? How do I get it? And I go, well, we could UPS it to you, or we could FedEx it to you, because we didn't have the structure. Now, the good thing is, the best thing about our business is the animal. Close behind it are the people associated with the animal. And so people in the bison business are problem solvers, and they get together and do things. And it's not just the ranchers. You have I talked about the tribals, bison producers, and the conservationists. But a few years back, Mike Faith, who's the chairman of the Standing Rock tribe, came up and he said, Dave, there will always be 20% of the issues we'll never agree on. But why do we let that keep us from working on the other 80%? And so we now have a memorandum of understanding with the Intertribal Buffalo Council and the Wildlife Conservation Society. And working together, we all came together to get Congress to establish bison as the national mammal of the United States in 2016.
Thank you so much for great responses. I think what we're going to do is get some microphones floating around here. We got Craig's got one up there, and I'll handle the front here. So we want to take some questions to any of the participants up here who have shared their wisdom. So if you just raise up your hand, we'll get a mic to you. Any questions?
Come on now.
All right, I see you in the back.
Great.
Thank you.
I actually have a question for Robert about your TerraCycle. What percentage of packaging do you estimate is coming back to those drop-off locations?
It's if you know anything about TerraCycle, it's probably a low number, because the reality is that unlike store drop-off, where you can take your plastic grocery bags back, and there's probably a store drop-off in every grocery store, TerraCycle drop-offs are few and far between, and there is a cost of actually getting that drop-off installed in your, it's not installed, but the box to your store. We have a box in our office, so everybody in the office pretty much uses it, but the box itself costs like $200 as a cardboard box. So TerraCycle is by no means a silver bullet, but it is a step in the right direction.
Thank you. Alex? the middle.
I have a question for, excuse me, a question for Rebecca. We do something somewhat similar to you. We use an organization staffed by disabled people to do QC and assembly work for our products. My question is, to what degree have you found any success in terms of taking up, trying to plug in people like that into jobs that require increasingly more intellectual capability? Have there been any processes that you've used that have worked reasonably well?
We have varying degrees of functionality with our workforce. We have set a priority on inclusion and bringing folks into the workplace. When we first started with this program, I contacted them in 2005 and said, this is what we want to do. And the options were to send our work to a warehouse and have them do it there. And that wasn't the program that we had envisioned. So we wanted to make sure it was brought into the company. And given the jobs that we have, the functionality varies. And so it is a crawl, walk, run, but there are we have training guides that we've developed so that now it's not so much a question of whether we're saying, maybe we won't have them do this because I'm not sure that they could, to we have this training guide, we'll look at how do a time study on it. So we do have to add that extra piece of a time study and then turn it over to them. We have in our facility, we have a partnership with Core Labor Source, and so we have a staff member that handles the day-to-day job coaching part of it, which allows us to do a little higher functionality than if we didn't have that function. So it's been a process, it really has, but I think we could do more for it. And to give you an example, our office is right across from the Temple Grandin School. So that's something I never even thought about, working with students with autism. But as I talked to the executive director and explained to her what we are doing currently, she said, our students are required to do an internship before they go to college or go to the workplace. And so we're putting something together with them. So it opens up some avenues. It may not be with intellectually disabled adults. It may be with a different segment, but it's opened up those opportunities, certainly.
Thank you. Front of the house, anybody up here? Ted, all right.
Also for Rebecca, have you found that it's better to create a group or community within your company with sort of a certain critical mass, 3, 5, 15 people, or have these workers work, dispersed within your departments and within the rest of the population of your company?
One thing we discovered is that it works better if they're working together. And a lot of the tasks are repetitive, and so we determine if we have intellectually and developmentally disabled adults. So developmentally disabled adults, in addition to the intellectual disability, they also have a physical disability. So we have some folks that can only use one hand. And so we put them all in the same room, and we have a bit of an assembly line where we know that with some of the functions, they will have to pass that to their partner who's sitting next to them. And with some of them, they'll be able to do the entire job. So we really do need a little bit of critical mass in order to get folks who have the functionality to complete the entire job. And typically what that looks like in our office is each day we have between 3 and 6 folks who are working in the we call it our Core Labor Source room.
Caitlin? Caitlin, you want a mic? She's leading by example. Are you leading by example?
I have an unplanned question. I guess this is for Robert. Do you know anything about Loop's shipping practices and whether they're carbon neutral or anything like that?
So today they are mainly doing UPS, next day delivery. And in terms of the offset, I don't think they have an offset program for that. One way that they've designed their shipping practices to be better is by actually using that tote. So by using the tote and shipping all of your orders at once, you're reducing the number of shipments and then obviously the need for cardboard, et cetera. So does that answer your question?
This is also for Robert, real quick. With this Loop project, is there any other advantages that you've identified, like maybe extended shelf life on the product because you're now in a nice solid tin, or breakage being less because you're in a solid vessel? Anything else that's been an added value to this?
So we don't have anything on there yet. So we have yet to learn all those lessons. I do think that other brands have some other value. So like for example, the Häagen-Dazs tin, they had to really think about the design of it, and it's actually a 2-sleeve stainless steel container, so that when you pull it out of the freezer, you're holding a stainless steel container. So it's a lot colder than normal. And by having a layer of air in between the inner container, you can actually hold this ice cream container without getting your hand cold. So it's something that you know, in a normal container of ice cream, you're melting the ice cream while you're holding it. Here, it's a benefit to the consumer that you can hold your ice cream, not freeze your hand, and keep the inner container cold. So we have yet to see our product specifically.
Yes. So I have a question for everybody, but Dave, I wanted to ask you a question. So sometimes when we're talking about restoration of animals, we think, hey, if we just protected them and actually didn't cull them anymore, put them into products, that might be the best way to restore the habitat. So can you talk about why how restoration and ranching and culling and processing of buffaloes is part of that process?
Bison evolved as a prey animal. I mentioned that predators learned how to hunt in packs. And so bison have been on fine dining tables in North America for more than 5,000 years. And the animal itself then, you know, that's one of the things, the slide I kind of blew through there is, it's an undomesticated animal. And so the way it interacts with the environment, again, this ecosystem evolved through this animal being a prey animal rather than just a pet. If there weren't any predators out there stalking the bison, they would have never been in these tight packs, moving around, stirring up the soil the way they did. And so, you know, by doing that, it's very important. Again, they take that cellulose from the grass and turn it into a nutritious protein. We can't go out there and graze that grass. Where the ranch is that we're at, it's actually owned by the Savory Institute, gets about 14 inches of rain a year. You're not going to grow anything out there but grass. And so these animals are the best tool to regenerate that soil. And the way that they do that is very important. Now, bison aren't the only ones that can do it. I'm not going to throw, you know, rocks at the cattle folks, because if you take a look, a lot of folks in cattle ranching and everything are adapting practices, rotational grazing and holistic management, where they're trying to take this animal and replicate what the bison did naturally. But like we say, we think bison do it naturally, so they're a little bit harder to handle, but they're a whole lot easier to raise, because right now, this morning, when it was 21 degrees and the wind was blowing, you know what the last thing I was worried about? 220 mother cows out south of Strasburg. They're doing just fine out there. And so, you know, Mother Nature doesn't throw anything at them that they haven't seen for the last 5,000 years.
All right, I'm going to ask another question. Robert, this one's for you. So I'm wondering, I imagine that the Loop partnership isn't free, and so I'm sure there are costs to you associated with that. And inside of your company, I'm wondering, how do you pitch that, right? I think there's a lot of people who are like, oh, there's these new, innovative, exciting ideas. There's no one else in pet doing it right now. I think we should be the first to do it. So what's that process like? How do you take it from your idea and work it into the company to get the okay on that decision?
Yeah, so I guess I'm a little bit lucky where we sit at WellPet in that we're members of PSC and we're looking for ways to improve. And so I think it comes back to your opening about prosperity and finding ways to not only be profitable, but also do it in a way that is sustainable or ideally regenerative to the entire, to everyone that we serve, whether it's our customers, our employees, our shareholders, et cetera. For Loop in particular, there is some upfront costs, and we don't expect to make money on it in the early stages. For us, it's a chance to be different, be on the cutting edge, and to deliver something to consumers that they really want. Being in an urban, Loop is being only offered in 3 major metropolitan markets today, and there's a downside because there's not many. For anyone who lives outside of those markets, you can't get it. But for those markets, if you can create a buzz in New York City for your product, that can lead to very favorable things in the future. So.
How much more time do we have, Keelan? We're good? Great. Another question from the crowd?
Dave, this one's for you. Is this on? I can't tell.
Yeah, I hear you.
Can you say anything about the traditional conflict between ranching and wild predators and how that relates to buffalo versus cattle, and how you get the benefit of buffalo roaming freely without that conflict?
So the question about predators and livestock in general, and there's a lot of controversy throughout the West of, reintroduction of the wolves and the like. For bison, again, it's that natural prey predator. What's interesting was there was an article in National Geographic that they were talking about the cattle herds up outside of the Yellowstone Park once the wolves came in, and the ranchers there were talking about their herds were starting to adapt these traditional, all of a sudden they found them staying more tightly packed, and they were going back to their native instincts. There's always, you're always going to look askance at anything that's going to kill your calves or whatever. With bison, it's less of a problem just because, again, they adapt to it. There's some great footage on TV, at least it used to be up there, from a National Geographic show, and it showed some wolves in Yellowstone that came in, and they got the bison herd running, and they all kind of moved the calves into the middle. And as they were running, pretty soon this one calf started lagging behind, and so the animals jumped on it. The wolves were at. Mom and 3 of her friends came around, and wolves were flying through the air, and they got the calf back with the herd. I never said whether the calf made it or not, but they got him running again, and pretty soon this old cow started lagging back, and she had you could tell the bones and everything. The wolves got on her. Nobody came back. So it's that. And it's one of the things in one of our handbooks, one of our ranchers that wrote an animal about management encourages ranchers, be the wolf. Think about the natural selection process and try and cull your animals, in concert with the way that they traditionally did it and the like. And so, that's what we try and emphasize.
What are the natural predators here in Colorado?
Well, the natural predators here, I'll give two examples. We were 2 years ago, it was during calving season, and we were moving the herd out there. We were on 4-wheelers, and I hate to move them during calving season, but you have to. And when a female goes off to drop her calf, she'll usually go away from the herd, and then a couple will go out with her. We call them buffalo midwives. And she'd gone out and dropped her calf, and they all kind of get that calf up immediately. And she started walking back toward the herd, and a couple of coyotes came, because they know that the calf is, vulnerable at that point. Mom never broke stride. She and that calf just kept walking right back to the herd because those other two females got between she and the coyotes and kept them away. The other one was we were trying to move the herd last month, and we were trying to move them down to the riparian area. And usually when you're moving them and they see the gates open and they see fresh grass, they're all about it. Just stand back. And they didn't want to go. They like kept turning back, and they were just, and finally I told Dave, one of the other guys, I said, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a mountain lion down there. And he called up 3 days later, he said, you hit it on the head. Said the neighbors saw a mountain lion down by the creek down there. So yeah, there's still some, you know, predators out there. Sorry, long answer to a short question.
Hi, this question is also for Dave. Dave, you know, we are in Boulder, Colorado, the home of the Buffs. However, it does seem like there is a complete difference between bison and the two buffalo species that are not even native of North America. So help us understand the interchange, because you used both terms, that help us understand the difference between the two and how they became such interchangeable words.
So technically, what we have out there are bison. The scientific name is bison. Around most of the world, buffalo refers to water buffalo, which is Bubulus bubulus. But from the time that the first French trappers started coming up and they saw these animals out there, they called them boeuf, which is French for beef. They called them boeuf. And so the Native Americans picked up that term and started, when they would transact with the white man, they would talk about the buffalo. And so their term right now is the buffalo, or the buffalo. And so even though, yeah, the scientific name is, you know, bison, again, the Intertribal Buffalo Council wrote up a great white paper for this legislation we're working on why the term buffalo is still so important to them and why they don't want to give that up. The other thing is, in terms of the public, it wasn't Bison Bill Cody or the Bison Nickel, and I don't sip Bison Trace, you know, and so the public just equates buffalo with. Now, I did tell, you know, the folks in the water buffalo business that we'll be proud to call ours bison if they'll call their product Bubulus, but they haven't bought on that.
Ted?
Any other questions?
I got Ted in the back there.
I got to follow up on Carol's question. So I understand, for Dave, I understand down the Meadow Ranch, East Conservancy has a herd where they're driving out the bovine genetics. Not exactly sure the overall value of that, but what's the beefalo, buffalo, bison? What are they doing down there with ranch land? Why?
That is a great question, because people hear that there's bison or there's cattle genetics in bison, in a lot of bison. And so they immediately go to beefalo, which we're not big fans of beefalo. That's a 3/8, 5/8 specific mix of bison and beef. We think beef does the best job in the world of being beef. So why the heck would we want to be another version of beef? People are buying bison because it is bison. And again, we talk about the way the animal. But the reality is, yes, in bison there are some, in a number of bison, there are some cattle genetics. What that goes back to, remember when I mentioned the handful of ranchers that created the 5 foundation herds? Well, that was about the same time that a huge blizzard hit the Great Plains, and it decimated the cattle herds. But they noted that these bison out there came through it in good shape, so they thought, I wonder what would happen if we crossed these, you know, and created what they wanted to call a catalo. And what they found was they ended up with a first generation bull that was sterile and females that had calving problems and bad attitudes, so they quit doing it. But as a result, there were some legacy genetics that were left in there. The testing that's done is on those bison that have got those legacy genetics, it's less than 1.5% of their genetic makeup. Now, I'm of Northern European heritage, and so I could have as much as 4% Neanderthal genetics in my DNA. My wife thinks it's a bit higher, but, you know, so that's, you know, and to tell you the truth, our business is actually going now. We're not looking for hybrid bigger. We're not looking to cross those. As you mentioned, it's not only the Nature Conservancy. We have a lot of private ranchers that are testing their herds right now, and those animals that come through with a high degree of cattle integration are getting cold. We have to be very careful about it because we're coming from 700 animals, so we don't want to throw away some, good genetics. We're calling that, but they're doing that. We're working with Texas A&M and UC Davis and these labs to help us do that.
All right. So Spencer, before you take over, I realized that we didn't get a Q&A from our last session. So we've got about 10 minutes left before we're going to head out for snack and a longer networking session. And so I thought I would just open it up to Q&A for Heather, for any of the speakers that we've had today. So if you've thought of things that you want to ask our speakers about, that includes me or my team or any of the advisory board as well, please raise your hand and we'd be happy to come by and ask some additional questions from any of our speakers that you didn't get to ask earlier.
That's a great question, great segue. And so I think we'll just let these folks off the stage. Dave, thank you so much. Robert, Becca, really appreciate it. Wonderful job. All right, so we put them back in the pool of previous speakers as well, but they were just drilled. So let's think about other speakers you have questions for that you would like to ask now before break.
Got one already.
Awesome.
Thanks. Well, this is for Heather or Melissa, but I don't see them. You here?
Heather's right
All
over
right.
here.
Hello. So with regard to the staff engagement survey, I was foolish enough to start trying to increase employee engagement for 9 months without measuring a base level. Do any of the surveys measure? If you give a survey today, could say, how does this compare with prior? Is that part of any of the templates? Or is it easily incorporated, in your opinion?
I think it could be easily incorporated. The way that I've constructed surveys in the past, you make a positive statement. I believe the company is moving in the right direction with employee engagement. And then people can answer on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being strongly disagree, 3 being kind of neutral, and 5 being strongly agree. And so you could frame the questions to be a statement that would reflect how are we doing over time. But I like to advise framing them in the format of a positive statement with which they agree or disagree on a numeric scale so that you can then quantifiably track progress over time as well.
Thank you.
Can I add some additional response to that?
Maybe.
So first of all, we would recommend baseline where you are today, and then go back again, right? So you could decide, hey, that's 6 months from now, or that's a year from now, so that your first time you do it, you have a baseline, and so there's not all these different variables changing. So you can ask again and see how it changed from 1 year to the next. The other thing is, Spencer told me once that they do this like pulse type of engagement where they ask people just 1 or 2 or 3 questions, and they do that on a monthly basis. And so that gives just like an immediate, this isn't an hour-long survey, it's not 15 questions, it's here's 3 questions, and it gives them a really quick glimpse into how engagement is going over time.
Yeah,
Great.
This is for Heather. I'm just a little confused about how diversity and inclusion initiatives overlap with sustainability initiatives.
That is a good question. All the questions are good, by the way. No judgment. I think diversity and inclusion, one of the benefits of having a diverse team is that you're going to be building a more resilient team. And so that can lead to long-term sustainability of a business. So in terms of strength of a business, I think it lends to the sustainability of. So that's one aspect of your question. The other direction that I think maybe you were asking is how to integrate sustainability in terms of social and environmental responsibility with diversity and inclusion? Good enough, yeah. Good enough. I think that the research shows that more diverse teams are more innovative. And what we need now in these times is a lot of innovation to correct our course from the way we've been veering. And so I think that building diversity and making concrete intentional efforts towards inclusion is going to strengthen any sustainability or purpose-driven work that you're doing. So I think they're all very complementary, and that movement in one of those aspects is going to positively influence the others.
Follow up, Lucas.
Please.
Yeah, green teams. I'm a big proponent of green teams. And I just wonder if you can speak about the experience you have with green teams in your consulting practice. What makes them successful? What kind of roadblocks are you seeing?
That's another good question. One of the things that I also work with clients on is zero waste certification. And so green teams are often a component of larger waste reduction programs and efficiencies and that kind of thing. I would say a roadblock that I see, or an obstacle to the success of a green team, is that time is not carved out for it within job descriptions. It's a pile-on. And so people feel like this is one more added thing. I was already 110% busy. And so people kind of run out of steam. So I think a best practice would be to really incorporate it and give the time and the resources to it so that it can become an integrated part of job descriptions, or that time is allocated for people to be able to participate, even if it's not part of their job description, so that there's real intentionality behind these teams coming together to generate the ideas of how does waste reduction apply to our setting? What are the creative ways that we can find to increase our efficiencies? And involving, talking back to the inclusion question, the more people you ask that question of, the more ideas you're going to have to work with, and the more you're going to spread out that workload and just make it part of the company culture rather than a directive.
I'd love to ask a similar question for Ben & Jerry's, which is when, you probably have a lot of different styles of sustainability programs internally, and you talked about 3+1, where everyone is asked to pick an additional goal that might be related to social or environmental impact. But can you talk a little bit about how the operational side of sustainability works inside Ben & Jerry's, and maybe how that's shifted, what's worked, what hasn't?
Different teams will work on different key performance indicators to address different sustainability things. So we have a social mission team that maybe I would characterize as kind of the think tank and policy and advisory group. So we have a woman who is our environmental sustainability leader, and so she looks at how to reduce the carbon footprint and look at packaging and materials use and all that. And she'll bring them forward to the organization, but different stakeholders within the organization will be looking at the cost and the quality and all those kinds of things. So we do have in social mission players who are kind of the internal experts, but we really work with external parties. So on I'll just use the carbon reduction as an example. We're working with a group by the name of Pure Strategies, which is based out of Massachusetts. And Pure Strategies works on sustainability and carbon reduction strategies, thus the name. And so they're great at the strategic sort of planning, so we work with them. And then we also work with a group called Native Energy. And Native Energy, while they can also do strategy, they're really strong at implementation of programs. So when we look at on-farm technology like biodigesters and other things that we might put on farm, Native Energy helps us to actually implement the initiatives. So I guess the answer is that we look for experts who are really, we're good at making ice cream. We may not be that great at reducing carbon. So we find the people who are good at reducing carbon, and we work together with them in collaborations to create the projects. So that's on the bigger scale, and then on individual scales, people might have individual goals for specific things in their job.
Thank you. Thank you. May I just add something there, Caitlin? One thing we have found really helpful, and it just goes back to earlier this morning, talking about the BIA, the Big Impact Assessment. So there's 4 key areas of the B Impact Assessment as a certified B Corp. And what happened is we were doing a lot of these initiatives in our company, and Chris, to your point, sort of green team kind of idea for a decade before we were a certified B Corp. But then right after we became a certified B Corp, an amazing thing happened, was 3 teams sprung up, and they addressed 3 of the 4 areas in the BIA. We had a PAWS team, Positive Actions for Workers. That came from the worker standpoint. What can we do in the organization? And that's an employee-driven team. The environment team, no surprise, was still already there, and that sprung up. And then finally, we had the community team that addressed the parts of the assessment where we wanted to grow there, and then the leadership team took on the governance piece. And so I would say, what's really neat about the BIA is it provides you a framework if you choose to use it that way. That was not a directive that Spencer came to anybody in the company and said, oh my gosh, we're a certified B Corp, let's use this tool. It was like literally overnight, people were empowered and engaged to use those pieces of that assessment. And then they're, to Heather's point, they're compensated for that time on those committees. They're not chosen, they're not hired, they are self-selected. And that's had some really neat impact. So if that's helpful for anyone, that's what's worked in a small company, and I have really appreciated that over these years. Do we have time for one more question?
Spencer, I have a question for you.
Sure.
When we were talking earlier about employee engagement, the conversation was more focused on employee retention, and then you said, we don't think about it retention first and development second. You said we think about development and investing first and then retention second. And since we're hearing so many things, I would just want to know, is there one thing you would share with us that on why we should consider doing that rather than the other way around?
Sure, Alex, thank you. So it's one of these things, do you choose to invest later once somebody proves that they're sticking around worthy? Or do you invest early on to help develop that human potential? And I would say at Westpaw, we don't do this perfectly, but we do it with some intention to give people access to training. So we have lunch and learns that are done by our development trainer. We do lunch and learns by other staff, but we also do very intentional trainings around leadership development, emotional intelligence. All those things come from, there are opportunities for everybody, whether you're on the front line of the production floor in the office or professional staff. It's really a question of like, when do you want to develop and grow? And so we'd rather do that right away. We offer an internship, an apprenticeship program. Montana's gotten really big on apprenticeships that the state has realized there's a huge gap, and we were the first to do an injection molding apprenticeship program in Montana, and those are offered to individuals upon the start, and so it is, I think, a philosophy that a lot of us would share in this room, is that we want to invest whatever that investment is, and certainly with people early on, and have them have the opportunity to grow. So again, we're a small company by some standards in this room. Maybe we're big by other standards, but we've got about 70 employees or so, and we have a woman who's does our training and development and helps with that. But it's really has existed before then, Alex, and we just really want to keep that growing. So development first is important, and we can learn and grow. And if you want another opinion, my colleague Sarah's in the room, and she could tell you how it really plays out. Thank you.